My name is Maya Clark, and today we're going to talk about 4 things. 1, the school-to-prison pipeline. 2, access to education while actually incarcerated. 3, the barriers one may face once leaving the system. And 4, how we're all gonna change that. Now, during this talk, you may hear me use the word prison and jail a lot. And to be frank, these are 2 separate things. A prison is somewhere you go once you've been convicted of a crime. A jail is not. However, since the system is great with deadlines, great with paperwork, has really no issues that need to be fixed, and I'm joking by the way, I'm going to use them interchangeably. But to start this talk, I simply want everyone here to imagine what you were doing at 12 years old. Maybe you were going to a Little League competition, gossiping with your best friend, or like me, eagerly awaiting the start of middle school. Middle school meant new friends, better cafeteria food, and more classes to take in a specialized setting. But now, imagine this. Instead of my narrative of starting middle school at 12, you are 11 years old, running away from home for good. The highest level of education you have is a 5th grade degree, and you can't read or write. For some, this idea may be hard to grasp, so I want to introduce everyone here to a person I know named Star. Star is a close family friend of mine who does not have the ability to read or write. For some context, I have the best parents, and growing up, they were super big on social justice. So it made perfect sense when one day my dad came home with a friend he met quite literally straight out of jail. Now, Star is a part of my family. He's at every major life milestone, every family Thanksgiving, and on our couch about 5 days a week watching TV with my dog. And so now, I have the privilege to tell you some of his story. After running away from home at the age of 12, by the time he turned 24, he often found himself without basic living necessities he needed. Things like deodorant, tomato soup, things we may take for granted. However, he noticed a corner store nearby him rarely checked their surveillance cameras, and the cashiers rarely paid attention to the door. Seeing this, he committed what I like to say was his first perfect crime. And I say perfect not because it was meticulously thought out or because it made perfect sense, but because it was perfectly sensible for him. It was a crime that allowed him to walk into a store, grab some tomato soup, grab some deodorant, walk out, and feel a little more human than he did upon entering. Unfortunately, unknowingly to Star, off-duty cops were in the store that day and noticed his suspicious activity. That was the start of 26 years of imprisonments he faced, all starting with a need for tomato soup. I say all this to say, think about a time you did something you knew you weren't supposed to. Maybe it was really late at night and you had a bunch of homework and you just could not get your English paper done, so you turned to ChatGPT, which, Mom, I've never done. Or you stole your best friend's favorite piece of clothing. Both of these are lines that shouldn't have been crossed, but they were crossed nonetheless. So I'm asking you, what makes Star's different? What makes his less human? And what makes his line crossing of wanting a can of tomato soup a justification for a life in bars? In Star's case, it's easy to think, what went wrong? And for him, he had no network. He had no parents to support him at home, he had no family to lean back on, and he had no school he was attending. And so therefore, these 3 things can be true. Going to school, getting an education, and having a full and complete network can all impact someone's road to incarceration. But here's the thing. Now that we've talked about why physically going to school is important, it's important to note that physically going to school is not enough to stay out of the system. So let's talk about the school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline is a term that describes how schooling in the U.S. can impact someone's road to incarceration. To explain, there's many biases in the school disciplinary system that can lead to unequal treatment of students. For instance, the zero tolerance policy. The zero tolerance policy is a policy that originated from the Gun-Free Schools Act, but has since flourished into dealing with other things like drug and alcohol possessions, non-violent altercations, and more. This can vary by school. A result out of the zero tolerance policy could be being sent to an alternative school. Alternative schools are smaller, more harmful schools that have higher levels of law enforcement. And so this becomes problematic because in a state like Kentucky, Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be sent to alternative schools to begin with. And so then it becomes clear that Black students are unjustly being exposed to law enforcement at a higher rate than what should be considered equal. So how did this all even start? Well, with such a strict policy, such as a zero tolerance policy, the repercussions can be extremely harmful. For instance, Black students miss 5 times as many days of school due to disciplinary actions than that of their white peers. But then students who miss at least 15 days of school become 7 times more likely to drop out. So you see the disparity. So therefore, with a system that's biased and has unequal disciplinary results, we see the school-to-prison pipeline as we know it today. For Star, as a Black kid from Puerto Rico, his teachers never noticed when he stopped missing class. So he dropped out before he could reach middle school. Had he had that network, had he had that support, maybe things would be different for him. But now that we've talked about once you're in school, what about once you're actually incarcerated? What options exist for you then? Well, there's a long history of Pell Grants, which are federal grants, being used by inmates to further their education. And this can be tracked all the way back to the Higher Education Act. However, following a string of amendments starting in 1992, Pell Grants became extremely restrictive. And today, depending upon the current administration of which you're under, Pell Grants can still be extremely hard to get. And so therefore, the system was back where it started. Limited access to education outside of jail and limited access to education while in jail. And furthermore, this limited access to education while actually behind bars leads to the barriers one may face once leaving the system. For instance, there's a statistic from the National Bureau of Justice that stated in 2008, out of 24 states, 66% of inmates went back into the system within 3 years. Now, at the beginning of this talk, we talked about STAR, and we talked about a network. So let's go back to that. Everyone's time in jail can look a little different. And for Star, his actually had educational facilities. He was even able to complete a few. However, he had to stop going to them because he needed commissaries. Commissaries are things one can get from a CVS. Deodorant, toothbrush, toothpaste, stuff like that. And so for Star, if he needed commissaries, he needed to work. And if he needed to work, he needed time. So he had to take time out of furthering his education while behind bars to get the basic things he needed to live. And unfortunately, this is all too common in the system as it wasn't exactly built to be adaptable for education. It was built to lock people up, chain them, and put them behind bars. And so for Star, before entering the system, he couldn't read or write. And after 26 years within the system, he still cannot read or write. Currently in the world, there are about 8 billion people. And over 300 million of them live in the United States. But in the United States, we're ranked pretty high according to the Population Reference Bureau as the country with the highest rates of incarceration. But we're also ranked pretty low as a country with one of the lowest rates of adults that have a degree beyond high school. So yes, somehow in the land of the free, we have the most people sitting behind bars. But that also means, for many of you in the audience, you may know someone who's been incarcerated. I know I do. Because the story of Star isn't one of fiction. It's the story of a close family friend of mine. And so, when thinking about the system and how education ties to incarceration, it can seem like such a daunting issue. But that's why we're here today. Because there's many things we can all do. For me, when I heard about the difficulties inmates face getting commissaries, I was outraged. So, along with my church, we worked to get a toiletry drive going and got over 100 inmates donations. And if I can do it, you can do it too. join a community organizing group. These are groups that can be started by anyone, even just passionate individuals that advocate for leadership, change, and justice. And if you're a mental health care worker or a healthcare professional in general, join a mobile crisis team. These are teams that go into your community when one is in crisis and send in mental health care workers, not law enforcement. And students, we can do a lot too. For instance, a lot of campuses like Columbia, Cornell, Bard, and so many more have programs just for educating inmates. At the University of Michigan, students created a youth voice group, and they made protests throughout the entire Detroit area. And educators, I didn't forget about you. For one, acknowledge the privilege you have. And know that privileges you have may not extend to everyone in the classroom. And think about that when handing out disciplinary actions. Or just make sure every student in your classroom feels belonging. To stop the pipeline before it starts. Or finally, everyone in this room can find their own star. Everyone in this room can find a person that just needs an education, a support, or a network. So yes, education can be a very big barrier in the system of incarceration. But we can all break that. Thank you.